Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the rebirth of this channel. Hopefully, this all goes out and it all goes well, and we don't deal with too many technical difficulties. I am your host, Allison, and with me, midwifing this potential something. Stillbirth? No.
Stillbirth, yeah. Miscarriage.
Hopefully healthy rebirth is Brian. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Brian, for helping me out. So what I wanted to do is discuss where I'm at with the projects that I'm doing, do something a little more informal, maybe respond to your questions or any comments that you have in the chat. I'm not sure how well this will do in terms of getting an audience, so we'll see. But anyway, welcome to the attempt to recreate or breathe new life into this channel. So, as many of you may know, I've been working on a project. It's called The Captive Eye. If you give me a moment, I will bring up all of my various informations. So, the tagline is fanatical child soldier infiltrates Norse mythology to stop Ragnarok. And one of the individuals who helped me beta this describes it as Game of Thrones meets Alice in Wonderland. Don't take that description to the bank. It's just to give you the general themes, a little bit of the plot and the kind of
the gist.
The gist. So don't genuinely expect it to be a flaming pile of dog poo like Game of Thrones ended up being. But anyway, I want to do a shout out to author Betty at author Betty, who did that tagline for me. And also another of my potential beta readers. He hasn't even become a beta reader yet, but he was interested in following my project. Doughboy, who is part of our community and takes part in our now weekly writers meetings on Sunday. And if you want to join that, you can do so at feedthebadger.com/subscribe to join our community and take part in all of our activities, which writers meetings are one. He gave me this as a summary for my project. Saving his world means destroying another. Forced into military service at a young age, Constance has survived merciless commanders and brutal training, all in the hopes that he and his fellow conscripts might save what's left of their dying world. Their mission takes them across dimensions to another world, both strange and bewitching. There, Constance has to face the truth at the heart of his secret mission, and he may not survive what happens when he does. So thank you to Doughboy for that summary. That's sort of an overview of the project that I'm working on. And that's basically why this channel sort of went dormant. Honey Badger Radio, the main channel, sort of went dormant. I did do a whole bunch of shorts like a couple years ago. You guys may have seen that and got a lot of attention. So apparently I learned that my YouTube strength is anything under 58 seconds. There we go. As long as I keep it short and sweet, people seem to enjoy it. But yeah, so that's what I've been doing. I've been working on this project. I have to make a big thank you to all of our supporters who helped me get a real live editor, like a real editor, which was definitely an experience. And she's been helping me with my first chapter, which has been arduous. I had a lot to learn about writing. People don't know this, but writing is actually a skill. I think people don't know this because everybody can write, really, if you think about it. Like, everybody uses it as a means to an end. But writing fiction requires a certain set of skills that it takes a while to develop or even figure out how to employ. And starting a first chapter is one of those skills. So I had to learn specifically, I had to learn how to establish immediate stakes, establish a conflict and a goal very quickly in order to get people into a story. And those are skills that they're hard. I suppose it's much easier just to say, we're going to make the lead a trans black samurai disabled kin. And if you don't like it, you know, we're going to...
Then you're a bigot. Buy my book or you're a bigot.
Buy my book or you're a bigot. Much harder to pursue merit and actually swallow your pride and recognize you don't know how to do something. I always thought I was actually like a good writer until I got an editor. Then you learn very quickly. But it's been a good experience. So I thank everybody who helped me fund that. That was a fundraiser we did last year. And it's quite, editors don't come cheap. That's why the main houses are firing them and replacing them with sensitivity readers who don't know what the hell they're doing, but they'll do it anyway, and they'll do it cheaply. But yeah, so it's been an interesting road, and maybe coming in the future, I might read some sections from the various first chapters that I've done, because I think now I'm on my 6th first chapter. Last week, I gave that version to the editor, and she's like, "Yeah, you're onto something. Still sucks in places, but it's getting there. Parts of it don't suck. Good job." Writing is fun, by the way. It's like you get in your head, you spend a lot of time there, and then you disgorge the contents of your ids to someone else to pick through and tell you how you suck on a fundamental level that you can never fully comprehend. But if you don't go through that process, you're like, you just release demons into the world, like Monsters from the Id. Have you ever watched that movie, Monsters, like that what's it called, Monsters from the Id, which is
Monsters from the Id? I don't think so. It's like a
classic science fiction. Monsters from the Id,
like Planet Id. Let me see.
Monsters from the Id. Oh goddamn, my computer's doing weird things.
I'm looking it up over here, but go ahead while I'm doing that.
Yeah. Main antagonist. Okay, so Forbidden Planet.
Forbidden Planet. Forbidden Planet.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
I've never seen that. That's one. That's on my list. It's on my list of movies I gotta watch. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good movie. It's so the monsters are from the id is there's this machine that projects aspects of this dark psychology that you don't confront, and then they come back to haunt you, and it's an interesting story. It's well worth watching. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah. The id is like the primitive instinctual, it's like the instinctual parts of our human psyche that seeks immediate gratification. It's like literally I'm just to make a comic book reference because I'm a comic book nerd. The Hulk is all id. So when Bruce Banner turns to the Hulk, his desires come out. Mr. Hyde is another example of the id. That's why he was like, he wasn't just violent when it pleased him, and he was also he was gluttonous, he was lustful, he was like whatever he wanted, he just let it out. So
it's almost like we are right now under siege by the creatures from the id.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's some id creatures running around and not being restrained by the ego or the super ego. But yeah, that's a good movie. I recommend watching it. And that's where I'm at in terms of the story. So that's sort of an update with that. I wanted to do like a little bit more informal, just shooting the shit, not going according to any kind of schedule with this, and see where it takes us. So we could talk about like your writing projects. Like you did comic books. How did you find the process of writing?
Well, I had a specific goal of making comic books accessible to young people, because I think that our media today is very confused about like what the audience is, and so it tries to be mature, but its idea of what maturity is like violence, sexuality, foul language, and it's not like something that you could it's like, okay, you mentioned Game of Thrones, and I know that there are people who watch that probably love Game of Thrones, and I'm not crapping on Game of Thrones. I watched the first season. I just felt it wasn't for me, but I'm sure that it's good in its own right. But a lot of people end up comparing things like Game of Thrones to Lord of the Rings because they came out around the same time. They were both fantasy settings. But a lot of times the people who are big Game of Thrones fans would say, well, Game of Thrones is better because it's what they would call it more realistic. They would say, oh, you know, there's all this death and like, you know, people can die at a moment's notice. There's a lot of sexuality. There's a lot of, you know, just like this darker material. And I'm of the opinion that while all those things may be true, I think that the reason why Lord of the Rings remains timeless has more to do with the substance of the narrative rather than like the you know, the stuff that happens, like whether or not the heroes win, or how whether or not we know like how big Aragorn's dingus is, or whatever it is, right? Those things are not important. Like ultimately, you know, what it's talking about is so, yeah, and like the I think the stuff that has like the most relevant content is going to be it's going to be the most relatable, and it's going to be the most human, but it doesn't have to be timely. And then this is like when I say relevant, I don't mean like it's referring to current events. Nobody wants that. You could see just based on all the stuff that's going on with Gamergate 2 and everything, the fandom menace, it's all like people thinking that what is mature is stuff that is, like I said before, all of those sort of like things that were restricted from for people who are under the age of 18, like language and violence and sex, but also that the content has to be like, you know, commenting on something in the current year, and that's just not true. Like if you can tell a story well, it will have universal applicability, which means that no matter when you watch it, like if you dig up a classic book, it doesn't have to be Tolkien, but you say something else like, you know, maybe you found, I don't know, The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas, right? Is that Dumas or Dumas? And you read it like in the year 2050 something. The only thing you might not relate to is like the elements of the time period, but the story and the basic central narratives and the emotional content and the themes are universal. Like they're timeless. So no matter when, that's why those stories last. That's why Romeo and Juliet gets adapted to this very day, because it is a timeless story that people experience. And in particular of that is the hero's journey, which is like what Lord of the Rings is, it's what The Hobbit is, it's what Star Wars is. So like for my storytelling, I haven't done it in a while, but I was working on a comic book, Bombshell, and I had all the art. I still have the pages for like most of the first issue, but I haven't gone back to it because I got busy with all these other things and I got really sick, and then we moved, and then COVID and all that. But what I wanted to do was I saw what other people were doing in Comicsgate space, and what I wanted to do was bring something that was very like very approachable for people of all ages. So, and I think that writing for kids is like the primary focus. It's actually really hard to do when you are an adult, unless you're like still in touch with that childlike side of you. And this is what we're not getting, like, you know, and I think that's kind of my approach. Like I don't know if you watched it, but they put X-Men 97. You ever heard of this show, X-Men 97?
No, I haven't really.
Okay. So way back in the 90s, it was like a Saturday morning cartoon. It was the X-Men, right? Based on the comic book of the same name. And it was very popular because around that time, there were a bunch of really great cartoons that were out in the 90s, like X-Men, and Spider-Man had a show, and the Silver Surfer and the Iron Man and all that. And Disney, because they owned X-Men now, they released a series or a season of a show called X-Men 97, which is essentially a continuation of the old cartoon from the 90s. And I thought, well, I watched some of it and it's not bad, but there is an issue with it. The issue is that I was asking myself, who is this for? Because when it was on television, that was like the 90s. So like I was like, you know, like in my late teens, right? And I would watch it, but it was for me. So but today it's been like what, 20, 30 years since it was out. So it's like, okay, you're bringing out the show, and nostalgia is definitely an aspect of it, because people who are young that would watch cartoons, they would have no point of reference, and they probably didn't watch the old shows. So it's like, well, who is this for? And I'm like, well, it's not for kids because they wouldn't get any of the references. Is it for the adults that watch the show? Because if it's for them, then the themes in the series are a little too like childlike, and it just comes across as a kind of like it's like cashing in on nostalgia. And that's the problem, is that like nostalgia is not enough, right? So what I wanted to do was make something that felt classic and timeless. So I was mostly like borrowing from like the comic books of the 60s, when I think that was like when it was at, and not its peak, but its resurgence. Because before that, like in the 30s and 40s, in the 30s specifically, we were, and in the 40s we were doing World War II, and a lot of the books were about that. And then when the war was over, they moved away from it, and like during the 50s, comic books were all like, you know, giant monsters, romance novels, crime novels, horror novels. Those were the very popular ones. And then it wasn't until the 60s till they came back. And so I wanted to feel like that, but I wanted to be aimed at kids, and then hopefully give something for the adults to enjoy. So I had a focus primary on, you know, like using action to drive the narrative, and then build on the characters as time goes on. So you start off with something punchy, like a hook. It's kind of like how, you know, a series might start with a lot of action, or a movie might, the first scene might be a lot of action, and then it's, yeah, and it slows down, and then it's like, let's get to know everybody, let's find out what's going on and all that. So that was like the general framework.
Yeah, so just to maybe bring together, so you were seeing sort of a flaw in how stories were written for kids, because they would it seemed inconsistent, or not tonally consistent, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like they didn't know who they were making it for, because you had like people my age probably, or maybe a little younger, making a show, and then it looked marketed to kids. They even had action figures and stuff, but the content wasn't relatable to kids because they didn't have anything to draw from.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this nostalgia stuff seems to sort of blur demographics, but the interesting thing is in the past they could create stuff marketed to kids or intended for a children's audience, but nevertheless had within it enough entertainment for an adult. And like, for example, The Emperor's New Groove, although I don't know if that did very well, but if you watch that movie, it has a very good blend of stuff that kids would like, and stuff and references and themes that appeal more to adults. And I think that comes from like a really, really tight writing. I don't know, Road to El Dorado, I think, is much more.
Oh, I love that movie.
I love it too, but I think it suffers from the fact that who the heck is this aimed at?
That's true. Yeah, that's another one. Well, actually, a lot of the DreamWorks stuff is a bit weird, because Road to El Dorado is a DreamWorks movie. And you can tell that the audience bracket they're aiming for is slightly older than Disney. I think that was how they were able to compete, because you can look at Road to El Dorado, Prince of Egypt. Like there's like, you know, people die in that movie. Like Prince of Egypt is pretty dark at points.
That is pretty dark.
Yeah.
But but so I get what you're saying. So and sometimes it just I also really like Road to El Dorado, but I recognize that a lot of the stuff in it is not appropriate to kids.
No, it goes over kids' heads, right? Until later. Yeah.
Like, where's Chell's head at?
Yeah, we went through that. I remember that. Yeah, definitely.
What's going on there? But yeah, like Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings. That's an interesting topic. I'm actually going through and watching Game of Thrones right now. I have never watched it before. Have you watched Game of Thrones?
I watched the first season, and that was it. I was.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, when they killed Ned Stark at the end, which I kind of saw coming, because I was like, I could tell by the tone of the show that like a guy like Ned Stark was way too noble and honorable and like all these good qualities, and I was like, they're not. I mean, even he was flawed still, but like, you know, that I knew that he wasn't meant to like last.
Okay.
You know,
we are now on season 3, and I think that, to be honest, I think the flaws that were going to cause Game of Thrones to implode and go down in flames were there in season 1. They were, and what I mean by that is it's something that, like, I think it ties into what I was saying about having to learn certain skills.
Yeah.
There is a certain skill set that you can see the absence of even in season 1 with Game of Thrones. And the skill set that I'm talking about is being able to manage the hidden story. And what that is the logic behind everything that you don't see in front of you. Like, Martin does really emotional moments really well, but I can see that he doesn't really write the connective tissue, the logic behind why we're seeing these things as well. And I think it's because, and he said literally in interviews that he got tired of being forced to write tight by because he was a television writer, right? So I think that when he was a television writer, they sort of forced him to put in that logic, that connective tissue, and he didn't really enjoy it. He just wanted to write the big shocking moments, the big emotional moments, the big twists and other things like that. Maybe even dialogue in these character moments, which he also does well. But the connective tissue isn't there. So when it comes down, when you get to the point where you need to do the landing, which is the ending, that is connective tissue, right? All that, the connective tissue is what's building up the ending. So that when you bring everything together and then you step back and you see, oh, it makes a cohesive whole, and it ended, and I'm totally surprised by this ending, but it makes absolutely perfect sense in hindsight. So I think he sort of has trouble with the connective tissue. I honestly think that the showrunners were, because I also read a good part of the first novel, I think the showrunners actually were improving on the writing and trying to bring in that connective tissue. And I know that's going to be a real controversial, that's a hot take right there in terms of Martin versus the showrunners writing. I think they were actually, at least in the first few seasons, they were improving. Like, they were bringing in things that made logical sense and started to try to compensate for some of the things that he was lacking in the original books. But to use an example of this connective tissue, the first scenes where you have this wonderful sort of set piece prologue where you're introduced to, like, the White Walkers, but not really introduced to them. They're just hinted at, and people are dying, right? And you have the guy who's escaping, and of course he's going to be killed because he's left his post, and apparently it's a death sentence to leave your post from the wall, and where he was guarding the north from the White Walkers.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is the through line from the prologue to the politics is not there. So in the first episode, I'm asking myself, what is the prologue actually setting up? And I know people will say, well, it's the White Walkers, but there should be some continuity between the prologue and the politics. And you can do that fairly easily if you just sit and let the story cook. And you say, well, what are the pressures going to be on Ned because of the sightings of the White Walkers? And how do we make this like the worst day of Ned's life, right? And the way you do that is he has this guy who knows that, or who suspects that there's the White Walkers. He's part of a long tradition of defending the North and the Westeros from the White Walkers, I assume. And he has a conflict between the expectation to defend Westeros from the White Walkers and abide by the king's law, which is that deserters need to be killed. And then you start to get a conflict, and you start to pull in the threat of the White Walkers into the politics, right? You see how that sort of combines the two, and then you move on. But the through line just was dropped. It was just like, it was gone. Just in the first episode, you cut the guy's head off, which I know at least some people realize was really stupid. But but then it's just dropped. So you don't have that spine moving through the two concepts. And I noticed that, and I'm like, oh shit. Like right there, you can tell that there's an issue with the connective tissue of this story. And of course it just sort of continues, and there's points in actually watching the show where I'm like, what is the point of this? What is the point of this scene? I mean,
right.
Martin, you write great dialogue, right? Is that the only point of the scene? Is just to show how awesome you are at dialogue? And I'm like, no, this scene needs to do more than one thing. It also needs to allude to the connective tissue that is eventually going to become the payoff at the end. And so I'm like, okay, so it's fairly obvious to me, at least, that there are problems with this story from the beginning. And I watched Game of Thrones way back when, before all of the crap came out, like all of the like it I don't want crap came out, but like it sort of
like before, like the later seasons, because like I think it was because the books weren't, so they were adapting the books at first, and then Martin hadn't released whatever the book needed to be released, and so like it was getting to the point where the show narrative was catching up to where the books ended, and then so they had to make the rest up. Or I don't know, maybe they conferred with him, and
no, they did.
You
I'm
know,
pretty sure they did
or whatever.
with him. That's what I
Yeah,
They conferred with him, but the problem is that I think this whole ethos of just writing the good bits or the fun bits, and not really attending too much to the connective tissue, the through lines, making sure things were tightly written and did more than one thing at once. So all of the technical, all of the craft of writing, and basically he was like, I'm going to do all the fun bits of writing, but I'm not going to necessarily pursue the craft of writing, is what I'm sort of seeing.
Yeah.
And it sort of comes through. And he even said that, to be honest. So I'm not just repeating what he said about his own writing. But yeah, at the end, I think that what happened is that this is a real hot take. I guess I'm just going to talk shit about Game of Thrones today. This is a real hot take. I think he wrote himself into a corner because he didn't attend to the connective tissue, the hidden story, and then he didn't know how to end it. He let the showrunners take the fall, and then he ran away like Zoidberg. Woo, 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 woo.
Yeah, sure. I can see that.
The hottest of hot takes when it comes to fantasy. But yeah, like that's my opinion on Game of Thrones so far. I'm like, way back when I watched sort of an episode with my father, and I found it to be interminable. Like it was so boring, and so like long.
No, I was bored to tears too. No, I'm not the only one. I think.
No, you're not the only one.
I think that yeah,
and
it's just me.
No, it wasn't just you. It wasn't just you. There were certain points where I was bored to tears, and I'm like, when the show is good, like most of the stuff with Dany is good. Tyrion is always sort of a joy to watch his antics. And then let's see what else was. I also really like the relationship between Brianna Tarth and Jaime. So there's things that I like about this story, and so I'm willing to say, yeah, there's good stuff here. But what I'm seeing is a lack of connective tissue. And that's unfortunate because, obviously Martin is a capable writer. And when he has an editor who's riding his ass like Seabiscuit, he probably can do really great stuff. And unfortunately, he decided that he didn't need that, which, but is like, and honestly, I think that of all the things that are happening in the publishing industry, I think that authors and publishing houses deciding they don't need editors is probably the most tragic, because like self-published authors, they maybe they have some skills, they have a group that tells them, oh, you're good at this, you're good at dialogue, you're good at interpersonal relationships, but what they really need is someone to tell them what they're not good at so that they can work on that. And you don't get that necessarily with self-publishing, because a lot of self-publishers aren't interested in that kind of editing. They just
Mhm.
well, make the spelling work, clean up the typos. And then in the publishing houses, they're just turning into caricatures, like just circuses. And they're getting rid of yeah, somebody says the live chat messages are disappearing. That doesn't surprise me. Like and there's not much we can do about it because YouTube is YouTube. But the publishers, like the publishing industry, they're firing actual editors who require merit in favor of people who just push DEI, like diversity, diversity into writing, and that's really unfortunate because we're losing a lot of the merit and the culture around the merit and the old techniques of writer craft. And yeah, so that's sort of what I have to say. Okay, so I'm going to go through the comments here because I don't want to belabor people's.
If you can, maybe how your comments are displayed is limiting what you can see. So if you go to the top of the chat in the back room, there should be a top chat and then an arrow. If you click on that, there's top chat and live chat. Just switch it to live chat. That'll show all of the comments. It should. I don't know why YouTube has a top chat. I think it's dumb and it shouldn't exist, but they do.
Soft censorship. Okay. So
yeah, essentially.
Comments. All right. So welcome back. Well, yes, it's great to be back, Steve. I hope we were able to do more of these. Like they're a little low key, a little less intense. I'm hoping just a little bit more fun talking shit about entertainment, shall we say. All right. So, AC, I'm reminded of the musical show Return to the Forbidden Planet. I did not know there was a musical.
There was, yeah. I mean, the movie is called Forbidden Planet, but it's the theme or the genre is monsters from the id. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an example of that as well.
How have you? Okay, see, Steve Dave adds, how have you dealt with writer's block? What has the planning process been like? One of the big things that I've had to learn is how to understand the way that I work as a writer and work with it and learn how to take criticism and then say, okay, the criticism is over. I gotta just get to work. That's been hard. And I think a lot of writer's block, for writer's block, what I've noticed is that when I write and I have answered a question before it really should have been answered. So if there is a mystery in the story and I'm actually writing as if the mystery is solved, I've often found that if I take a step back and say, okay, well, how did they come to this conclusion? How did they solve this problem? Like, I need to write that. And if I step back and look at that and then write from that point, I often, the writer's block disappears. What I've found is that I need to be intrigued by the story that I'm writing. I know that sounds really crazy, but if I am not intrigued, then I can't write. And so I have to figure out what is intriguing about whatever it is I'm writing right now. And sometimes that's figuring out, okay, well, how did they come to solve this problem? Sometimes that's figuring out, well, what's the additional emotional pressure on this character? What is the emotional conflict that this character is dealing with? So it's, for me, getting rid of writer's block is stepping back and getting intrigued by my story again and figuring out what question needs to be posed to get me intrigued with the story again. All right, so hopefully that's, the planning process has been interesting. I'm still in the process because I'm still in a big rewrite. Essentially, I came to the developmental editor and I said, I don't know if I really want to do anything substantial edits. And she just laughed. And now, like a year later, I'm redoing like a substantial part of my first book because I've realized that a lot of people were asking me for something specific. And that specific thing was the story of how my character became so good at what he does. And they're like, well, they wanted that boy striving, boy learning from a mentor, boy failing, boy getting up, and like that whole hero's journey thing, right? And what I wanted to do was I wanted to do the fun bits where it was all the like the crushing emo despair of realizing that his purpose was fundamentally evil. I wanted to go right to that. And I was going to be like, okay, that's where I start. Well, that's not where the story really starts. The story, a lot of the people who are reading were right. It starts more with how does he get to this point of mastery before we ask, well, what the hell is he doing with it, right? And I had to go back to the drawing board and start to think about how to present that in an interesting way. And so that the planning process has been interesting. I'm still in the process. Like, don't take anything I say as something necessarily worthy to listening to. Oh, I guess that's ridiculous because I'm presenting it on YouTube. So take it with a grain of salt. Like, I'm still in the process. Okay, so Steve Dave also asks, is Lord of the Rings more about a theme of hope than Game of Thrones? I think
I don't have a comparison because I haven't watched Game of Thrones, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna bitch about Game of Thrones. I am really freaking tired of the sex in Game of Thrones. And I am not a person like I'm one of those crazy evil fangirls that does like erotic fan fiction. Like I don't have a problem with sex. And I certainly don't have a problem with sex in stories. But Game of Thrones presents sex like freaking pornography website pop-ups. It's just like you're just trucking along. You're like, oh hey, yeah, Tyrion's hilarious. Oh damn, tits again. It's just like,
yeah, right.
Where's the X to get rid of this? Like, I don't need this pop-up. Oh god, there's another pop-up. Please get rid of them. And it's like it gets to be too much. And it's like Game of Thrones ethos is we're just gonna throw tits and incest and really discuss. Like, I have lost count of the amount of vomit and horse shit and piss is in this freaking show. And it's like, why is this here? I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's like tampon gets thrown across a room at some point in this freaking show, or we see someone finger painting in feces. Like, it's just this so much shock and gross out.
That's right.
Sex and really brutal violence. And I'm like, and one of the problem is that a lot of it doesn't need to be there.
It doesn't serve the story.
It doesn't serve the story.
You're right.
It's just salaciousness for salaciousness.
It's just, yeah, exactly. It's like people will. It's like the thing about what I was saying about Lord of the Rings. We don't need to know, like, what Arwen, is it Arwen, the elf princess, Eowyn, whatever. I get them mixed up. We don't need to know what Aragorn and the elf woman's relationship is like. We don't need to see it. Like, they kiss. That's enough, right? It's like. And I think that people think, well, how do we know it's mature if we don't see them boning? It's like, but that's not the mature part. The mature part is like that, there is this recurring theme of like, what does it mean for Frodo to go all this way and risk so much and essentially there's a point where Frodo and Sam are close to Mount Doom and they don't have any more food. Mm-hmm. And Sam is like, or Frodo is like, no, Sam says, well, I'm going to save a little bit for the return home. And at one point, I think Frodo says, yeah, I don't think we're going to be going back. Like, they realize this is a sacrifice they're making. Mm-hmm. Like, that is mature. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, things like, I don't know, like the realization that the Ents, are trying to stay out of a war. They don't want to be involved. And then they realize that it doesn't matter because the war has come to them. It's like this saying, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. These are really mature. I think they're mature concepts. I'm not saying Game of Thrones doesn't have that. I don't know. Like I said, I only watched the first season, but to call something mature because people say, they say gamer words or because there's a boob on screen. It's not sufficient, you know?
No, it's not. It's maturity is more about making pragmatic choices and weighing options, and actually maturity is about making a choice between two bad outcomes, basically, and trying to figure out which one is the best.
Well, realizing that life isn't about like, you know,
trade-offs.
purely beneficial choices, and it's always trade-offs, right? Like these are mature concepts.
Yeah. And there's not, like, with Game of Thrones, I think it struggles with that, which is interesting because one of the short stories that I've read about Martin was really about a trade-off without getting into this idea of demonizing the person who had to make it, or softening the trade-off. Okay, so it was a, you know, so I know he can do that. It's just, it seems like Game of Thrones was really, I think, really shallow in its morality, and it substituted a lot of shocking content for that kind of.
Well, wasn't it primarily concerned with the idea that morality is always in shades of gray? Like that was the thing that it was doing too, wasn't it?
I don't even know if it goes with that. It's like there's the issue. Well, okay, it's not wrong about power, because the thing with power is that when people solve problems, someone is always going to be pissed. So you're going to be a villain to someone, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know if it really got into that, because I think honestly Game of Thrones was still playing favorites when it came to protagonists versus villains. Like from the beginning, I could tell that Martin was probably going to do like a redemption arc or something with Jaime. Although I don't really see an arc so much as just Martin likes that character, therefore something. So, but I don't know. It's just like
that was why I wasn't really crazy about Tyrion Lannister, because I was like, oh, clearly this is Martin's favorite character, and so he's always gonna have the best lines. He's gonna say the quippiest quips. And I remember when the book first came out, and you know, I had a friend that was really into the books, and he was talking about, oh, it's so unpredictable, and like you don't know who's gonna die. And I was like, okay, so I'm gonna give you a prediction. Tyrion Lannister's gonna live through the whole story. And he was like, how do you know? I was like, because he's obviously and I haven't even read the book. Just based on what I saw on the show, I was like, he's obviously the author's favorite. And this is a problem because like a good, I think, and I'm not calling him a hack, but I think that a good writer is willing to put his favorite characters through the most shit. Like just to at least and he probably shouldn't have a favorite, like, you know, I think it's better to, I think like what you said, like, I don't know where it's gonna go, have that like down. It's sort of like you were talking about connective tissue, and I was thinking, 10 poles.
Yes.
10 poles, right?
Have 10 poles.
So it's like, you know, where it's sort of like a flight, like you know where it's gonna start. It has to start here. It has to land over here. But whatever happens in the sky, you know, is like you can do whatever as long as you land where, you know, not necessarily where the audience or your readers think, but like where you know. That way everything else will logically follow. You're not going to have people saying, well, how does this work? How does that work? Right? So yeah. I think Harry Potter does a good job of that. I haven't read those books, but I'm sure people watching has read Harry Potter and they'd have a thought on it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, just to get further into the comments here, we might not be able to get all of them. So is Lord of the Rings more about a theme of hope than Game of Thrones? I think it's just more, actually, honestly, the big difference is that Lord of the Rings is more about the psychological pressures of a very hard decision. I think, like what it takes to make a hard decision, and like, because everything comes down to the decision to throw the ring, to give up the ring. And
well, it's about giving up power for the greater good in a way. I mean, understanding that absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's lots of themes, but yeah. And so I wouldn't even say it's about hope so much as what it takes to stand up to an all-corrupting evil and make that hard decision. Whereas Game of Thrones is about
Well, it's hard to tell what Games of Thrones is about because it just didn't really end.
I mean,
I guess
yeah,
it's supposed to be about the pressures of power, maybe.
Well, I think they're both about power, but there is a different way of handling it. Like, like Lord of the Rings, and I mean all of Tolkien's work, because I read through the Silmarillion, which is extremely dense, but like all of them are kind of like there is a overarching theme which is about like how corrosive power is. So there's lots of examples, like when Sauron made the rings and he gave them to the elves and the dwarves and the men, he used it to control them. Because they were, you know, he said men were especially susceptible because they desire power above all else. So it was really easy to control them. You could see it with the Palantir, which are those like seeing stones that Saruman had, and Denethor, who was like the steward of Gondor, who wants to control. So like he still wants to rule, even though he's not king. He wants to make sure that there's never a king because then he always stays in charge. He was willing to get his hands on the ring because he thought he would say we'll use it to defeat Sauron, but he wanted the power, right? So this is all throughout, even in The Hobbit, when the dwarves get their home back. The first thing King Thorin wants to do is basically keep everything to himself. He becomes like the dragon, like Smaug, right? So and it shows like the overwhelming like power of, or the overwhelming power that power itself holds over people, like how it can corrupt them. But on the flip side, there is where the hope comes in. I think this is what the commenter's talking about, is that the normal people, which are the Shire folk, which symbolize regular people who, you know, have a regular life, like the peasantry, the commoners, that their alienation from all of that power makes them more resilient. And it reminds me of the really great line from The Hobbit where I think it's Galadriel. I think Galadriel is talking to Gandalf, and she asks him, why did you choose the halfling? You know, why did he choose Bilbo to carry to go to the mountain, right? Even though she was pretty sure that he wasn't going to make it back. And Gandalf said that Saruman, who is the other wizard, he says Saruman believes that it is only with great power that you can keep the darkness at bay. But that is not what I have found. What I have found is that, he said, is the little things, small acts of kindness and love that are more powerful at keeping the darkness at bay. So a sense of stability and community and love, which is what the hobbits have for each other, right? They know each other's birthdays. Everybody's they're almost all like kind of related. They go to the same parties. And he says that it's those things that keep, like, you know, that can actually have a longer lasting impact. So, you know, and he says that what is it? He ends it by saying, perhaps it is because I am afraid. So he's the wizard. He says, I'm afraid, and Bilbo gives me courage, because he's like this normal guy that's like, you know, everybody's, and you see this all in the Lord of the Rings movies where, you know, they're on this like crazy epic journey, and yet there are moments where Sam is like, hey, do you want like some potatoes to go with these rabbits that we found? Like these very little things which are very humanizing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it might even speak to Tolkien's he was an Anglican, he was a Christian, and you know there's this thing that gets said a lot about Jesus Christ, that he was on the one hand the Son of God, very powerful, but, and this is very important, he lived as a man. So he was a normal guy, he liked to go to parties, he liked to spend time with friends, you know, and this was like as important. The fact that Christ was a man was as important that as he was, you know, the Son of God. And I think that this is like the balance that Tolkien was trying to strike with this idea of, you know, these large scale conflicts that had, you know, tremendous far reaching consequences. And yet the people who lived the simplest, most innocent, almost like a child life were the ones that had the resilience to like see it through and win. So this is, I don't think Game of Thrones has that. Like it lacks innocence. That's what it's missing.
Well, it's not even lacking innocence. It doesn't really have an answer to how to deal with power.
No, it just corrupts everybody, right? Yeah.
What?
Daenerys, doesn't Daenerys like suddenly snap and like burn a whole city or something with her dragons? Well, I don't know. I didn't watch it, but
yeah, but I mean, so far I couldn't tell you what it's trying to say. I honestly just think it's just doing things to be entertaining, which is fine.
Yeah.
Like it's fine that, you know, if you want to be entertaining, like I'm not getting a really strong message. I would have to get back to you on the message that is about power in Game of Thrones once I see it. Like I think that honestly right now it just strikes me as just being entertainment. That's it. Like,
yeah.
Nothing really deeper. Okay, so moving on. Oh, Disney, we're just kind of skipping the fact that X-Men was so about counterculture and difference, says Steve Dave. Yep, we're skipping a lot of things with Disney. Let's see another one. So, okay, so I'm not sure I can really get into this because I don't really want this to go too long because we want to eat. But Steve Dave asks, so what's the documenting process like? You build timelines of the recent events in the world, red string penning the events together. My process is really crap. So I just basically tent pole things. So I know approximately where I want the character to be in the middle, approximately where I want him to end up in the end, and then I just try to write that. Sometimes I get a little bit more fine, like I'll have like vestibules in my tent, but that's the main thing that I do. AC writes, I don't understand why people get sucked into these mega hyped clinically written series like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, 24, etc. Free your mind. Okay, well, let's all free our minds. I haven't watched Breaking Bad or 24. And I think Alex W is saying, ironically, I believe he's referring to Game of Thrones seems more childish. And okay,
I would say a bit sophomoric. That's what I would say.
Free Cat says Law and Order use the DSM IV to make characters.
DSM-4.
DSM-4. Yeah.
Like the yeah.
Yeah, probably. I don't really know if that really worked for them. Nova Fan says, what about power specifically? How it affects people, the types, good, bad? Well, I think that Lord of the Rings definitely has something to say about power. I don't know what Game of Thrones has to say. Power is sexy, I think, is probably Game of Thrones' ultimate conclusion. Nova Fans, it seems a lot of stories are just about the feel-good moments. We forget about the narrative. Not just feel-good moments, the titillating moments, the shocking moments, the disgusting moments, the horrifying moments. And honestly, like a lot of the emotional connection moments that George wrote or Martin wrote really fell flat for me. No offense to anybody who really likes his work. But I thought that they just were very twee and cloying, to be honest. He did a lot of stuff that I didn't feel like he earned. Like the conversation between Brianna Tarth and Caitlin, whatever, Ned's wife, that just fell flat for me. It just felt like it was just incredibly cloying and overwrought. And I find that when he does those kind of, I think what you might call an exultant moment, at least in that show, they don't play very well. Like the exultant moments in Lord of the Rings are like just unbelievable. The exultant moments in Game of Thrones they're a little like, I don't know, getting out a particularly stubborn fart. And then you realize, oh shit, there's a little bit too much movement down there. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, that's over with now. I don't think, like, at least when it comes to Game of Thrones, I haven't found him very good at consistently writing an uplifting, triumphal moment. Although, kudos on the surprising use of horse shit, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm being really dismissive of Martin, but I'm so far I'm not super impressed. There's some things that I like. I think he did pretty well with Dany's narrative, like the Queen of Dragons, but he could have done a lot more to actually tie it in with the Westeros narrative.
Yeah.
And there was things that he did that I didn't even understand. Like, Martin, did you spend any time just thinking about your story? Like, for example, why not tie the death of Drogo, which is Dany's great love, to Westeros's machinations, thus giving her a really strong motive for wanting to go tear Westeros another asshole? But he didn't do it. Like, it's so obvious. And I don't know, was he being subversive by not doing the obvious good craft thing of trying to tie in your storylines a bit better? But ultimately, like, if he's being subversive in that way, and he's like, oh no, I'm going to write a story that just sort of that just suffers entropy and things don't go anywhere, and I just fuck off, and I'm not going to make the obvious connections, I'm just going to let you tee hee, you know, like, if you're going to be like that,
were you expecting consistency and order
from somebody whose ethos, whose attitude is that? Like, seriously.
Oof.
Okay, so all right, so Nero Smith says, what is this channel about again? I have a vague memory of seeing it a decade ago. Was it about men's rights? Well, right now it's about what we're talking about. So it was actually pretty much any social theory that sort of occurred to me at the time, and now I am really invested in the kind of social statements being made in writing. Like, I think that storytelling is the future. And if new ideas start with a new story. So people play, like, they stories are like practice for new ideas. And people are not going to adopt new ideas until they're able to practice with them for a certain amount of time. So I think that it's really critical to talk about stories and how stories function and what they do. Because if we are going to make a big change, like Compassion for Men, it's probably going to start with stories where people can just practice the idea a bit in a safe way. All right, so that's a good way to end. Thank you, Nero,
all right,
for giving us a great send-off question. If you would like, well, I guess this isn't really supporting the show, but if you want to send us a comment that we can maybe reply to on the next time we open up this stream and come on this particular channel, you can do so at feedthebadger.com/justthetip. Again, this is also, I'm trying to start the promotion for my story, The Captive Eye, which tagline, oops, all my windows are in the way, sorry guys. Tagline,
is it Game of Thrones meets Alice in Wonderland? Is that what you mean?
Okay, yeah. The Captive Eye, a fanatical child soldier infiltrates Norse mythology to stop Ragnarok, and Game of Thrones meets Alice in Wonderland. So look out for that. I'm aiming for next year's summer. Let's see if there's any more to be said. All right. That's it. Okay, back
all
to
right.
Me, right? Oh, wait. No, it's my channel.
No, you got to do it. You're the one.
Yeah, I'm the one. It's all on me. So like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I hope to see you again. Hopefully you enjoyed this content. If you do, just give me a comment in the parts below. Hit the parts below. And yeah, see ya. Thank you for Thank you for your kind attention.
Better than you? I guess I'm going a little further than you are. Yeah, I'm fucking better than you. Okay? Much better than you. You are garbage.